Whoa, baby. We have 3,000 grit paper. We're going to finish off this crank. Welcome to Duchesne's Corner. Welcome back, everyone. Well, we went to the big city, and I was able to find the sandpaper that I wanted. Or I shouldn't say sandpaper. This is more like cloth. 3,000 grit is like a nice fine linen. And I've already gone over this crank. And as you can see, we are immaculate. This turned out beautiful. Just almost a mirror. You can see myself in there. But that completely finishes off the crank. So now that that's done, I was going to set this aside for a bit, but I finally got some stuff in the mail. And here we go. We have main bearings, connecting rod bearings, and a complete gasket kit ready for this engine. And I couldn't be happier. Summit, great people to deal with. The length of time it took me to get my parts is no fault of their own. Just, actually, it was a Fel-Pro gasket kit that was held up a bit. And I think actually my main bearings, because they're a standard size, and I guess most of these engines of this age don't require standard size bearings. They're usually oversized. So it took a little bit extra to get them in. But once they were in stock, Summit got them to me really quick. And one thing for you guys here in Canada, do not deal with the U.S. Postal Service. If you have the option, pay the money, get FedEx, or I guess Pure Later, but I think that's pretty expensive from what I saw. But FedEx was awesome. This here it came in a box almost twice the size just for that gasket kit, but I think it ended up being $44. But it's worth it. Pay the extra money. You can track it the whole way, and it comes in a timely manner. So now it's time to start getting the technical stuff. With the crank finished, our bearings in, we have the block turned upside down, main caps are off, and we are going to do our first fitment of the crank. This will be a dry fit, so you got to be careful. But we're going to check out to see if all my work last week polishing that crank was worth it. Is the bearing tolerance and clearance going to be good? Or do I have to send that crank off to get ground down and then reorder a set of bearings and get an oversized set? So, to show you what I've got going on here in prep for this. First step, of course, was pull the caps off. I got all the caps off, made sure they're in the same order as they come off of the block. And then, of course, double checking to make sure the little notch for the bearing is going the right way. So everything is correct. Notches will line up perfectly, offset back and forth, and then I know everything is where it should be. Now I have taken a piece of that 3,000 grit sandpaper, and I've gone through and I've cleaned the surface here where the bearing sits. So I've cleaned all of them, all 5, and I've also touched off the top here as well to make sure there is nothing that's in between here. Now I've also gone around just with my hand, making sure that there's no gnarl or curl on the edge of any of this stuff. Now this middle one here, so you get 2 on that end, 2 on that end. This is the one for your thrust bearing. You want to make sure that the groove is really clean, nothing in on its side because it is recessed into the block a little bit on the webbing, and make sure it's all clean and good to go. That's your most important one. The rest are the same way. This is the one here. This is that recessed edge, just like it's in the webbing. Make sure it's clean all the way around, both sides. And then again, I went through this and I just touched up with the 3,000 grit paper just to clean it up and make sure that there's nothing between the bearing and the seat, so we get as best measurement as we can. So got the main bearing set out here. Of course, there's 5, 2 in each end, my center thrust bearing. Got to make sure you're putting them in the right spot. They do have an oil hole. That's the top bearing. Remember, the block's upside down. So top bearing gets the oil hole. The bottom one is just straight, but they got an oil groove that goes all the way around it. So these come, like I said, these come ready to go in. You just got to clean them, right? They got a little bit of an oil on them, just I guess to keep some surface corrosion or whatever on them. I don't think they actually rust, but you got to clean that off because, like I said, we have to make sure there's absolutely nothing between these surfaces, so we're getting an accurate and true measurement of what the play is in this crank. So I just grabbed random bearing, not really starting at any point in particular for any reason, but I have cleaned the bearings best I can. Nothing fancy here. We're just making, I should show you here first, just making sure the notch in the bearing is lined up notch in the hole on the side, and we also got the correct one with the oil hole. So these are just going in, lined up, pressed in place, making sure we're not sticking past the top and that they're perfectly even in. It's that simple. Gonna go across and put the rest in. So, got all my upper bearings in. All holes are lined perfectly. We got a nice fitment here. Center bearing, thrust bearing. It went in nice and snug, so there's no movement in the bearing at all. And I've got these cleaned as best I can. I can't get it any cleaner. It's gonna, it is what it is. Just take care that it is for sure clean, lint-free. There's no dust, there's nothing sitting in here. And again, after you moved everything, you want to make sure that all your surfaces here are perfectly clean as well. So now we're going to grab the crank. We're not putting any oil or any grease. We want this to fit perfectly as tight as we can. And it's just going to have to be gentle. We're going to be careful. And we're going to set that down in there very gently. There we go. Now, whatever you do, do not turn this crank. Remember, we're in here dry. We're only doing this so we can double check our tolerances for our bearings. So do not turn it. All right, so I started setting my plastic gauge in. If you look really close, you can kind of see that red line there. There's one here, and I have one on the end as well. But this is it. It's just a soft piece of plastic. It actually feels more like wax than anything. And this is what's going to go between the bearing and the crank. Check my clearance. So I have my caps all ready to go. I'm going to set this last one on. Then I'm going to gently set my caps on and get ready to torque them down. So caps are on. Now it's time for my bolts. These are all lubed up, ready to go. Get them in place. And then I torque these down to 85 foot-pounds. So I'll do a round of 40, and then I'll come back and bring them up to 85. There we go. Everything is torqued to 85. Now we pull it apart and hope that every one of those little gauges are under 0.0020 of an inch. Now you need to be really careful when pulling these caps off. We don't want to mess up the gauge. Very careful not to turn the crank as well too, because it might smear the gauge. And hopefully they all stick to the bearing caps, but this one did. The crank is perfectly polished, so they shouldn't stick to it. The bearings have kind of a velvet feel to them. But that is what it looks like once your plastic gauge is pressed in. Then on the paper, on the little paper they come in, They have little increments all spread out on here of how thick they are once they crush. So for the Mopar big block, anything between 0.0015 and 0.0020 is perfect. And I can tell already we're under 20. So I take the little gauge here and I place it in. You can see the crush on it. I don't know if you can see it. This is the 0.002, and we are just under it, just by a hair. So we are perfect. Now I'm going to check the rest of these and make sure that everything is fine, but I believe we have a perfect crank. There, all bearings are out. Now you can see, kind of leaves a little bit of a residue mark on there, which is fine. We're going to clean this crank off one more time. And then, of course, all the caps, everything worked out perfect. We're all just a hair under the 0.002, which puts it just over 0.00150, which is what they need to be. So, crank is good. Now we will be doing this again when we do the connecting rods, but that is definitely at a later date. I'm going to pull this crank out. We're going to give it one more clean down and then oil it because it will be set aside for a while now. Same goes with all the bearings. We'll clean this up as well. Now these I will leave in a bag with the bearings attached. The crank though, the bearings underneath here, I will be removing those and numbering them so they match the corresponding bearing over there, because this will be rotated quite a bit here because now it's time to paint this block. That's definitely for another episode, but it's time to get this thing cleaned up and looking pretty. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys again later.